It's just a huge honor for me today to be podcast interviewing Frank King, aka the mental health comedian, a suicide prevention and postvention public speaker and trainer who turned a lifelong battle with depression into a keynote worth spreading. After writing for The Tonight Show for over 20 years and performing corporate comedy, Frank's his mission is to end the stigma surrounding mental health by sharing his sights with anyone, everyone who will listen in an effort to start the conversation. Frank has thought about killing himself more times than he can count. Like many of us, depression and suicide run in his family. He addresses his own trials and tribulations using a tool people from all walks of life can relate to: humor. With his TED Talk, which is amazing, has over 20,000 views, A Matter of Life or Death, he openly addresses topics considered taboo in today's society. As a motivational public speaker and trainer who travels the world, Frank uses comedy and personal life lessons to help break the ice and start an engaging conversation amongst those struggling with mental and emotional stability. This act of faith helps those struggling to find a voice to express themselves. Additionally, it helps create a pool of common knowledge where those who suffer and those who care about can swim. He believes that there is humor, there is hope, and where there is laughter, there is life. Nobody dies laughing. Frank is originally from North Carolina, now spends his off days in the Pacific Northwest. He travels the United States and beyond, spreading his message, hoping to end the stigma surrounding mental health and influencing the general public to start the conversation. Frank, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Howard, I am delighted. Nicely done on the bio, by the way.
When I got out of school in '87, dentists used to always say that dentistry had the highest suicide rate. But as being a dentist for 31 years, I've had patients who are police officers say, yeah, police officers have the highest suicide rate. And it seems like anything I can read shows that our military has the highest suicide rate. How is suicide in dentistry? Do you think it makes even the top 10, or is it after military no one even?
Oh no! Matter of fact, they did a showcase last July for the Seattle Study Club for their coordinators conference, and I started the keynote by the showcase by saying, okay, I've got good news and I got bad news. The good news is dentists are not number one on the list of at-risk occupations for depression, thoughts, and suicide. The bad news is 5, 6, or 7, depending on which study you happen to read. Here's how it goes, by the way: construction, excavation, mining, farming, fishing, forestry. Dentists and veterinarians are right there, and they switch back and forth. 5, 6, 7. And then come first responders, physicians. 1 physician a day in the U.S. dies by suicide. And then I think the military follows that.
Is there a chart somewhere for that? Do you know where there's a chart on that? Or
would you like me to send you a link? And you can put it in the notes for the. Okay, hang on. I'll send you a link. You can put in the notes for the podcast.
Because suicide, it seems like, growing up, the most of my life, America had 30,000. They had 30,000 die in a car accident, 30,000 died in a work accident, and 30,000 killed themselves from suicide. And that was pretty stable till about the year 2000. And then suicides just taken off. I mean, how many people killed themselves last year in America?
47,000, which is about 1 every 11 minutes. And by the way, opioid deaths just passed car accident deaths this year, and the 47 doesn't include opioids. There's 65,000 opioid deaths by themselves,
which was the entire casualty of the Vietnam War. When I grew up, all my friends' older brothers were all in Vietnam. So when I grew up, we used to play war all the time, and we played it intently because you just thought, when you got out of high school, you're going to go to Vietnam like everyone's older brother. And now that entire 10-year casualty war of American soldiers, 68,000, is how many overdosed from opioids in 1 year. That's just insane.
Well, and think about this. When I speak to groups, I tell them 47,000 a year died by suicide. On 9/11, roughly 4,000 people, I guess, died on that horrible day. So, what is it, 11 times that many die every year, 12 times that many die every year by suicide every year. And then add opioids. I mean, it's an epidemic, and the reason I got started speaking was because the vacuum is hardly anybody is talking about it, because it's one of those things you just don't talk about in, as my mother would say from down south, in polite company.
Right, right. And the other thing about 9/11 is, 2,996 people were killed, including the 19 hijackers, more than
Yeah.
6,000 injured. But my gosh, we spent 5-6 trillion dollars, in wars battling that, and then you sit there and say, well, okay, let's just say 3,000 people died in 9/11. 300,000 Americans die in the healthcare system each year. I mean,
Yep.
so priorities and can get emotional, but what I love about you is you're talking about a dark subject that people don't like to talk about. I mean, when I was little, people didn't even want to talk about money. Like no one would say how much they made.
Yep.
Women wouldn't tell you how old they were. And now a lot of things have come out of the closet. Homosexuality came out of the closet. Smoking marijuana as opposed to alcohol came out of the closet. Do you see the stigma with suicide coming out of the closet, or is it still a real taboo?
Oh no. It is. It is. It has come out. I got a note this morning on Facebook from a friend who graduated high school in '86, and she said, Frank, my best friend in high school died by suicide, and A, nobody talked about it. B, nobody wanted to talk about it. And if an adult was asked about her death, they would just say she died suddenly. So the good news is we are more open about it now than we were back then. The bad news is we have a long way to go because suicide and mental illness are about the last two taboos for, as my mother would say, speaking about in polite company. And here's another part of the problem, Howard. A friend of mine is getting ready to do a TED Talk on how do you come out to your friends and family if you are depressed, because there's a stigma attached to mental illness, and then how do you come out as suicidal? There's another stigma attached to being suicidal. So she's going to do a TED Talk on how do you come out successfully to your friends and family. She's got a friend who came out to her folks that she was depressed. She sat her folks down. I got something serious to tell you. And she comes out as depressed and suicidal, and they're like, "Oh, I was kind of hoping you were just gay," because that they can wrap their minds around. It's the idea that someone wants to take their life is hard for normal people to grasp.
Now, it seems like a lot of the research I read and some of the podcasts I've done some podcasts with substance abuse people, and a lot of people, I'm reading that the same percent of the population, whether it's about 15%, are abusing substance, are mentally ill, are suicidal. In fact, one guest came on my show and she said that she probably thought 85% of all the people abusing a substance were self-medicating mental illness. Do you think depression, suicide, substance abuse is all the same people with the foundation of mental illness?
No, I think a goodly number of people who are mentally ill self-medicate with drugs and alcohol. I don't think 85%. That doesn't sound quite right to me. And there's also a slice of the population, Howard, who they just use drugs and alcohol recreational, perhaps to the point of abuse, and don't have any mental illness. Now, if you have a mental illness, it can exacerbate that. But there are some quote unquote neuronormal people who are just drunk or just junkies. I mean, the two don't necessarily go hand in hand. It's not, they're not what to call comorbidities. They don't necessarily exist always in the same brain, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, what do you think the overlap would be, though? I mean, you can be a drunk and not be mentally ill, and you can be mentally ill and not abuse alcohol. But what do you think the overlap is?
I think the last study I read said that upwards of 50% of people who have a drug and alcohol problem are in fact self-medicating. So I think it's closer to 50% than 85%. That would mean that the other 50% of people who are, recreationally using and abusing drugs and alcohol are just neuronormal, and they're just using. They're not trying to treat something.
Same question for suicide. What percent of people who commit suicide do you think are mentally ill?
Oh, I would say pretty much anybody who is not, let's say, a high school teacher who gets busted for, having improper contact with a student staring at a federal jail sentence and just goes, "Look, I'm not going to jail," and kills themselves. I would say it's relatively rare. Here's the thing. suicide and depression oftentimes is not situational. In other words, it can be triggered by a situation, divorce, bankruptcy, losing a job. But in my case, I've been most depressed and suicidal at times in my life when things were the best. So it's not, it's my wiring and chemistry, not so much the actual situation. Now, there are situations that trigger my depression, and there are situations that trigger suicide, but I would guess that from what I've read, the majority of suicides are not simply situational, lost a job, declared bankruptcy, got divorced, unless, of course, like I said, you're facing a stretch in a federal prison where your dance card's going to be full every night.
Right. So what is your message for dentists? Where do you think they could benefit from you and your message on the Mental Health Comedian?
Here's the good news, Howard. Of the top 10 occupations, because those are my target markets, I pitch them all. Of the top 10 occupations, the only 2 occupations that are actually actively doing something to prevent the members of that occupation from dying by suicide, I guess 3 include the military, are dentists, veterinarians, and the military. And first responders, are coming around. But dentists and veterinarians are leading the pack in, look, this is a problem. We have to do something about this, and we have to do something about it now.
So said you were going to email me a link to the top 10 occupations?
Yes, I can do that. Let me shrink it down to half size here. You'll feel a little squeeze. That's all right. Yeah. So I think what dentists can do, it begins with starting a conversation, like my TED Talk. The whole idea is you need to start the conversation. You need to give people permission to give voice to those feelings without recrimination. You need to be able to need professionals the ability to give voice to those feelings and experiences without losing their license. Because if you're a physician or a dentist, and I assume with dentistry, if the licensing board finds out that you have an issue, can they take your license? Can they?
Well, that's really changed to the better so far. When I got out of school, 31 years ago, if you got caught being an alcoholic, they were all loving concern, and they had the pee in the cup program, and you instantly got 10 buddies from the dental society that were all in AA with you. But my God, if it was Vicodin or opioids or cocaine or something like that, they thought you were a criminal and you needed to be in a cage. And that's really changed for several states. Now, the term I hate using the most is the United States of America, because you can't compare Alaska to Miami. You can't compare San Francisco to Wichita, Kansas. So you're talking about 50 states. And just like you would think, some of the more redneck states in the South are still thinking that, you need a spanking when you have a substance abuse issue. And I know dentists, some of my friends that I'm actually really good friends with, think it's just a choice. They don't see it as a disease or addiction or things like that, or so it's tough when you're talking about the United States, because it's really, in fact, even the Federal Reserve says that the United States is 9 different countries flying under the same flag. That's why they have Federal Reserve branches all around the United States, because it's so it's so diverse and huge. It's funny, when I meet dentists from outside the country, they always say, oh, I went to America. And I say, oh, where did you go? And they always flew into New York City to the Greater New York Dental Meeting. And all they've seen in America is Manhattan. And I always think, man, what a bizarre, what a bizarre sample size to think, what is America? And then swing into Manhattan for the weekend. That's oh
my God. So
did you ever find that list? Or are you still emailing?
I am actually still searching for it as we speak. So I guess the answer to your question is if dentists like the Seattle Study Club, if they would bring me in, to one of their biannual meetings to broach the subject in front of everybody, because what I find, Howard, is when I do that, it starts conversation. I just did a suicide prevention talk on Lackland Air Force Base. And I happened to run into one of the gentlemen who was there, because lunch followed my presentation. And he said, Frank, you would not believe, at lunch, every conversation at our table and around me was all about the things you talked about. And this is something I've never heard spoken out loud on this base. So that's the that is I believe that is the solution, or that is the beginning of the solution to that.
So, I'm trying. CNN says, oh, what do they say? The using information for the highest suicide rates. What are they saying? In 2015, the construction and extraction field had the highest rate of suicide for men, with 53 suicides per 100,000 worker. Women in arts, design, entertainment, sports, and media had a high suicide rate of 15 per 100,000. Arts, design, entertainment, sports, media saw the largest increase in suicides among men. So I used to hear that women attempt suicide more, but men have higher suicides because when men attempt it, their completion rate is very high because they use a weapon like a gun, whereas when girls attempt suicide more often, but it's pills or cutting something where it's more likely they can be resuscitated. Is that true, do you think, or do you think that's not true?
No, I do believe that it's true, because men more often than women. Actually, women attempt more. Men
complete more,
carry it through more, complete more, because I don't want to use the word successful. Complete more because they use a gun, and one of the problems in the U.S., regardless of what you think about guns, and I've often said, look, I'm not an anti-gun nut. I'm a nut, but I'm not anti-gun. It's because guns are so readily available. In the U.S., there are so many and so easy to obtain. Although you take away their gun, they will find a way to die by suicide if they are, hell bent on dying. 2 out of 10 people are hell bent on dying by suicide. There's nothing you could do. The good news is, Howard, 8 out of 10 are ambivalent by the studies I've seen. So you can interrupt that cascade down if you can start the conversation again. Back to that, starting the conversation.
Huh. So it's plague dentistry. I mean, I've never gone a year without having a troubling hearing of a suicide. And in fact, in Phoenix, I was talking about this because of our podcast coming up. I was talking about it over the weekend with my buddies, and they were saying that about 1 to 3 dentists in Phoenix have killed themselves every year since we've been here. My favorite instructor at dental school killed himself. It's just troubling. What would you say to the people listening to that might be thinking about this, or to the dentists that aren't thinking about it, but they often wonder if a close friend or loved one might be thinking about it?
Well, let's first talk about how do you spot it, and we go upstream a little bit. Depression, of course, as I mentioned, generally precedes suicide and manic depression. In other words, if you're on the downside, the manic side of manic depression, there's mania, hypomania, and then depressive state is actually more dangerous than simple, ordinary depression like I have. First, you need to figure out, determine if they are depressed, and there are signs and symptoms. If you would like to go over a couple signs and symptoms, you can look for these things. 1, they have trouble getting started in the morning, rallying in the afternoon. 2, they let their personal hygiene go. That's a big indicator. Eat too much, can't eat. Sleep too much, can't sleep. And every doctor in the country, and I'm hoping someday the dentists will do this, are supposed to ask 2 gateway questions, mental health gateway questions. Have you felt sad or depressed in the last, I think it is 2 weeks? Have you lost enthusiasm for ordinary social activities you used to take a great amount of joy in? And if the patient answers yes to either one of those, there are 7 more questions that go into greater depth. And your family physician is supposed to ask you those every time they see you. But I got to tell you, my family physician has yet to ask me, and I don't know if it's because they don't want to know the answer, because they're limited to 10 minutes per client. What if I say yes, I'm suicidal? What's the doctor going to do? Because there's a shortage of mental health professionals. Where does he refer me? I think that the physician all of a sudden, and I suppose the dentist would feel on the hook at that point if a patient came out and said, I'm depressed, having thoughts of suicide. So if those are the signs of depression, the question comes up then, what do you say, what don't you say if you believe, let's say you believe the dentist is depressed. Here's what you don't say. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Turn that frown upside down. Everybody gets blue now and then. Why are you depressed? You have so much to be thankful for. Again, it's not generally situational. It's the practice could be extremely successful. All his patients love him. They love to see him. His staff is fabulous. He's surrounded by the people like you say. You pick your staff very carefully, but the dentist could still be depressed. So what you do say is, look, I'm here for you, and you got to mean it. I know that depression is a mental illness. With time and treatment, things will get better. I know you're not crazy, lazy, or self-absorbed. I will take the time. I'll help you get the treatment and mean it. And if in fact, Howard, you believe the dentist is depressed, or the dental hygienist, or the patient, then the next question you have to ask in this fashion is, are you having thoughts of suicide? Just as blunt as that. There's an old urban legend that you should never mention the S word in front of someone who's depressed, because I love this. It might give them the idea. Suicide, what a great idea. Why didn't I think of that? Trust me, it's crossed their mind. Signs they may be suicidal. Again, the eat too much, can't eat, sleep too much, can't sleep is a crossover sign. They are collecting the means, whether stockpiling medication or buying a gun, to die by suicide. They are giving away prized possessions because they want to make sure those possessions go to the people they want them to go to when they are gone. If someone gives away a pet, that's like top of the pyramid in terms of giving away possessions. And here's a counterintuitive one, very dangerous. Depressed, and all of a sudden happy for no apparent reason. They may have chosen time, place, and method, and they know the pain is finite, which, by the way, speaks to another misconception. Being suicidal, my friends and family, anytime somebody dies by suicide, I get phone calls. Why would Anthony Bourdain want to die? Well, the answer is, chances are he did not want to die. He just wanted to end the pain. I know when I came so close, I just wanted to end the pain. If I could have pulled the trigger and then woken up pain-free the next morning, that would have been ideal. But unfortunately, with a gun, there's no coming back. You can't. So does that help?
Yeah, and it's like Anthony Bourdain. That was a shocker for me, because you would just think that guy and Robin Williams and Marilyn Monroe and Ernest Hemingway, you would just think, my God, they're role models. They made it to the peak of the mountain. I mean, look at Anthony Bourdain. I mean, what's your job? Oh, I travel the world and meet interesting people and eat neat food. While I mean, it just seems beyond crazy that these would be victims to self-harm.
Well, and here's the deal, Howard. I did a TED Talk on that very thing, and I used Kate Spade, also very successful, and Anthony Bourdain as examples. My guess is the TED Talk I did is called Suicide, the Secret of My Success, Dead Man Talking. I believe I am as successful as I am today because I always had suicide as that emergency exit, pull the handle, door pops up, and you're out. And I've read several studies that said a third of entrepreneurs are depressed and having thoughts of suicide. And clinicians believe it's because that they have long hours, little sleep, unmet expectations. I think that's probably the case in a lot of cases. But I also suspect, because I've talked to a number of entertainers and entrepreneurs who are not entrepreneurs or entertainers, they're not depressed and suicidal because they are entrepreneurs and entertainers. They are, in fact, entertainers and entrepreneurs because they were suicidal. That's how I was. I was unhappily married. I was working in the insurance business, great business, not for me, and not doing comedy. And I knew I was going to kill myself sooner rather than later, unless I made a change. And then I realized, wait a minute, I could divorce my wife, quit my job, try stand-up comedy. If it works, great. If it doesn't, I can still kill myself. I posted the pitch for that TED Talk on YouTube and got 12,000 hits over the weekend. So I knew I was onto something. Then I did the TED Talk, which has gotten a goodly number of. So I think that Anthony Bourdain, he was going to Vassar. I don't know what program he was in there, but it's a great college. He loved restaurants. Folks took him to Paris when he was 8. Fell in love with food. All during high school, worked at restaurants. When he was in college, he was working at a restaurant or two. But he's in a major that's not culinary. I'm guessing he came to the same juncture I did. Look, Vassar's a great school. This is a great major, but this is not where I belong. I belong in the restaurant business. So if I stay in this major at this college, I may kill myself. I believe, yet underlying mental illness and self-medicated to the max. So maybe he made the same decision I did. Look, I could quit my quit college, go to the Culinary Arts Institute. If it works out, great. If not, I can still kill myself. Kate Spade, very similar. She's working at Mademoiselle magazine. She's the editor of the accessories part of the magazine. I believe she may have said to herself, look, I'm not supposed to be reviewing other people's fashions. I should have my own fashion line. Maybe she's depressed and thinking, look, if I stay here and do not live the life I believe I should be living, I'm going to kill myself. Is it possible she thought, well, what the heck? Quit Mademoiselle, start my own fashion line. If it works, great. If it doesn't, then I can kill myself. And I think what happened was, Howard, because people asked, why would somebody with everything to live for, Bourdain and Kate Spade, I believe they just got tired of living. I think what normal people don't understand is that living with a mental illness is like being that Greek character Sisyphus that has to roll the rock up the hill every day, gets near the top, rolls back down. When you have mental illness, you wake up every morning, there's a rock in the hill. Some days the rock is small and the hill's not so steep. Some days the rock is a boulder and the hill is Mount Everest. But every day with a mental illness, there's a rock in the hill. And my guess, this is what happened to me, and I'm guessing it happened to Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain. They woke up one morning, they just couldn't move the rock. I woke up one morning, I couldn't move the rock. Decided to end my life. Time, place, method. I had it all planned. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're a comedian, and there's been a couple of movies that have come out in the last couple of years about comedians, and I think the question was, does comedy come from pain? Do you remember that movie?
Yes, and I do believe it does.
What movie was that? Was it Dying Laughing?
It may have been. And then there's an HBO special a guy just did in the last year. Comic came out, talked about his treatment, recovery, and his thoughts of suicide. It's
I think
friend of mine.
Dying Laughing, where they were talking about how the craft, the creative process of gifted comedians comes from extremely complicated lives.
Well, and Howard, I hate to sound like a broken record on this, but guess what? I did a TED Talk on that. It's called Mental with Benefits. I believe that mental illness is not a singularity. It's a combination of mental illness oftentimes and mental ableness in the same brain. The same wiring that causes my depression and chronic suicidality, I do believe, it gives me my sense of humor, timing, imagination, and I think with comics, with entertainers, with musicians, with politicians, you look at the number of people who have been successful in a variety of fields, and the list of ones that have bipolar, ADHD, ADD, depression, whatever, is rather long. At the end of my TED Talk on that subject, I said, look, you don't have to have a mental illness to be rich and famous, but, it may not hurt. So I think, it starts off like this. What if those of us with mental illness are not living with a genetic mutation, but an amazing evolutionary adaptation? What if it is, as Malcolm Gladwell says of such things in his book, David and Goliath, a desirable disadvantage? You'd never wish it on anybody, but if you can treat the mental illness and embrace the mental ableness, as most comedians have done, and ride that horse as long as you can, and Robin survived it till 62, which for someone with his issues, I do believe, is a long time.
And Bourdain made it to 61.
Yep.
One of my most favorite books of all time was the Hypomanic Edge, the link between a little craziness and a lot of success in America, by John Gardner. Did you ever see that book?
I've got it. I'm about halfway through it.
And it was an amazing book, thinking that there's a little bit of crazy leads to a lot of success. And
I think that one of the first examples he used was Alexander Hamilton, I do believe, who was born in poverty in the Bahamas or somewhere in the Caribbean, and of course rose to great heights. And from historical records, he had mood swings, and he could work hours on end without sleep. And so, yeah, I'm thoroughly enjoying that book. And by the way, there's a football player named Johnny Manziel, Johnny Football, who just came out as bipolar and now getting treatment and medication. But he was the youngest, only freshman to win the Heisman so far. Very successful. I believe he achieved a great deal of his success in that band of hypomania, where you're charismatic, energetic, enthusiastic, you take inspired risks. The problem is he was self-medicating. So sooner or later, after 2 years with the Browns, Cleveland Browns, it melted down and he was out of the league. But again, it could be argued.
What I thought was most interesting about the hypomanic edge is they said that America, for years, America had 4% bipolar and Europe had 0.5%. So they just thought everybody was measuring it wrong. And then when they finally started getting serious, they realized, wow, there really is a big discrepancy. And then it took them decades to figure out that it was natural selection. Who was the most likely European to say, screw this country, I'm going to get in a boat with nothing, and 1 in 8 boats sink across the Atlantic, and I'm just going to sail to America and start my dream. And who is that? That's someone in a manic episode, and that ends up with 4 out of 100 Americans bipolar and only 1 in 200 of Europeans, because we brain drained them and built one of the biggest countries. I mean, it was kind of like when, who's that guy, Elon Musk, when people were saying, he was on Joe Rogan's podcast, smoking pot and drinking beer. Dude, there's over 100 billion humans have come and died. There's only 7.5 billion live today. How many of them have started a car company? And then on the side, a rocket company where the rocket lands and is reusable, and then has a boring company on the side, and has been married and divorced to the same woman twice. I mean, what does Elon have to do to say, hey, can you guys kind of, chill? I mean, I imagine his brain is an amazing place, but everybody needs to give that guy some room, because, your cousin Eddie isn't going to start a car company. I mean,
Well, and to the idea of mental with benefits, I believe you treat the issue, but you embrace, enhance, energize whatever their ability is, which will change the frame for them and their peers, reduce stigma and bullying. And Google at this point, I am told, is hiring people with autism and very specific skills. They may have 0 social skills, but they're really good, as many people who have an illness are, at 1 or 2 things. And so Google's hiring them and letting them do that thing, rewarding them for what it is they do well, rather than trying to mainstream them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, Larry Page, he is he's autistic. He's on the Asperger's syndrome, where that's why he got into computers. His dad, he was a cheesehead from Wisconsin. His dad didn't ever see Larry Page ever working in the functional world with people. So he thought maybe he can relate to this machine. And then what I've always learned in programming is that, all these companies will tell you that one good programmer will do the work of 5 faster. When you got 5, it's kind of like a team project in college. When you got 5 unmotivated people working on a project, they get it done. It's late. It sucks. They'd rather just have one good programmer. And Larry Page knows that some of these autistic people, they just crawl into a different dimension. It's kind of like to the Matrix. Yeah. And one of those programmers can equal 100 other programmers if someone just completely immerses themselves into the programming matrix and just keeps doing it.
I heard a woman speak decades ago, about how Hollywood, the production companies, use people who have bipolar. Because if they're in the hypomanic or manic phase, then they can work, twice as long as an average human in a day's time. They need very little to eat. Hollywood's all about deadlines, and so they let them go for 2 or 3 weeks, and then when they crash and burn, they understand, look, go home, get your head together, we'll see you when we see you. So again, they have embraced that ability, but the normal, the basic corporate world is not going to well, you can't do that, you don't have any time off anymore, PTI, whatever it is. You don't have enough PTI to go do that. So it's unfortunately the straight up corporate world has not tumbled to that fact, except Google apparently has. Let me address something that you asked earlier on about what can I do for dentists. I spoke for the coordinators at the Seattle Study Club last July. Did a 15-minute showcase, and I got a standing ovation, and people were crying. And I talked to the Speakers Bureau that booked me for that, and I said, do you think we'll get a lot of bookings at the conferences around the country at the Seattle Study Clubs? She goes, Frank, the coordinators, obviously they believe it's a problem. They believe you have part of the answer. She goes, the dentists, she goes, I just get the feeling the dentists are going to go, no. We don't want to talk about that. We don't want to go there. We don't want to. So, and I haven't gotten a phone call. I should have had a phone call by now with a booking or two with the Seattle Study Club. So I think the stumbling block may be the dentists themselves. So I'm hoping they will come around. I'm wrong. I'm hoping but I haven't got any bookings for the next academic year, so I don't know.
Well, maybe. Well, if someone's listening to you and wants to book you for their deal, your website is thementalhealthcomedian.com.
Yes.
And you're on Twitter at the MH Comedian for the Mental Health Comedian, the MH Comedian. It's just a taboo. I'm sure something as complicated as suicide. It's probably multifactorial. I'm sitting here typing a list of all the ones that I knew coming up for this show. It seems like a couple of my friends who did it, it was a severe reaction to a loss of a lover. One guy came home, his wife left him a note, and she left him, and he did a lot of IV sedation. So he just went to the office and started an IV and put himself down. Another guy, same thing here in my backyard. His lover left him, and so would you say that a bizarrely overreaction to loss of love is a trigger for suicide?
Yes, I would say loss of love, loss of a business, bankruptcy is that's why I came so close, was bankruptcy. I mean, I had the underlying depression and the underlying thoughts of suicide, but I had always maintained until we lost everything in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, and my wife was devastated. Her pain was really what was killing me, and if I'd been single, I think I could have sailed through. But having to deal with her pain and my pain, that pushed me over the top. That's why, I decided, I made that decision. I crossed that barrier. Which once you've crossed that barrier, once you've decided you can end your life, there's three factors: burdensomeness. I'm worth more dead than alive, or people would be better off without me. In my case, I was worth more to my wife dead than alive. $1 million life insurance policy. There's a sense of isolation, social isolation. Working as a stand-up comic, you're working by yourself. No committee meetings, no team. It's relatively socially isolated. And then once you cross that barrier that you decide you can, in fact, take your life, that's the intersection of that Venn diagram where things become very dangerous.
Yeah, I had a patient who's oh my God, she had two boys and a girl, and one of the boys was in high school and got in a car wreck, and he died in the car wreck. And then later that night, she heard a bang, and her other son upstairs took his own life. So she lost a son in an auto accident and a son from a suicide in one night. And I just thought to myself, I couldn't imagine living through that much pain. But what scares me about it is how I get we're right to bear arms. I get that. I was grown and raised in Kansas, went to undergrad at Creighton in Nebraska. Everybody in Missouri, when you go to a Walmart during season, there's more duck decoys than there is boxes of Tide soap. I totally get it. But where I think that we have failed is I've heard that the congressman and the NRA have really put downward pressures on the CDC, linking how having a firearm in the house is just so increases your chance of something bad going on. And it just seems to me that if people are concerned about someone or whatever, the first thing you should do is get the damn firearms out of their house. Do you agree with that, or do you think, if you take away the gun, they're just going to go climb up on the roof and dive onto the driveway? I mean, do you think the gun? Do you think the gun makes it easier, faster to do, or do you think it's not really linked?
I think two out of 10 times, take the gun away, the person's going to hang themselves. 8 out of 10 times, take the gun away, I think there's a good chance you've interrupted the cascade. And the problem you mentioned was I don't believe the CDC is allowed by law to study the problem. They haven't. They've asked many times, let us study it as a public health and safety issue. Because I talk about suicide prevention as a dental workplace health and safety issue. So, and in other industries, I talk about.
But you're saying the CDC is not allowed to study it?
No, they've asked many times, can't we study this as a public health and safety issue? And they've been disallowed by the federal government.
And why would someone in the federal government not want the CDC's 15,000 employees to study this?
Well, because and I think you hit on it, Howard, and I don't know your politics, but I think you hit on in that the downward pressure from the NRA. If
I
you look
know,
at the list of
and
people,
the thing is, people need to be able to, everybody wants to criticize someone else, but I mean, people need to look inward, and I mean, you can't grow up in Kansas and not. I mean, my boys, my four boys, their grandmother. She's got to have over 50 weapons. I mean, shit, she lives on a farm. She can walk out her front door and shoot a 30-06 in any direction blindfolded because she's not going to hit anything. But I still think it is completely un-American when these people that want to have the right to bear arms and their leader at the NRA, well, he sure as hell doesn't have checks and balances. He lives more like a dictator of an unchecked balance, and he's always talking about how bad the government is. But when politicians take money from the NRA and then tell public health speakers and research scientists that they can't study this and talk about it and try to come around, because if you just say anything about regulation or the Second Amendment, they gets all emotional. I mean, we're not going to solve complex problems by not talking about it and not sharing blame. There's a lot of blame to go around.
Unfortunately, it is one of those third rails of politics. And when I speak outside the dental industry to other industries, there are three of us that are going to be speaking together. There's a guy who does active shooter drills. That's all the way downstream. There's a guy who speaks on handling confrontation at work. That's midstream. I'm going to come in and talk about depression, thoughts of suicide, signs, symptoms, and solutions, which is upstream, because if you can catch the person who is depressed and having thoughts of suicide upstream, you might not need the confrontation training or the active shooter drills. It's a shame that it has to be three people to come in to solve this one problem, but that's just the way things are here in the United States. It's for dentists, by the way, because people ask me, well, why dentists? Well, they're a lot like veterinarians. Come out of school with a big student loan debt, costs a lot of money to start a practice, even a really successful practice. The more patients, the more expense. So you're working through lunch, you're working late, you're working early, you're not getting to the gym. So you got mental, physical, and financial stress. And then you mentioned earlier an easy access to barbiturates, I guess, and IV barbiturates. Same with veterinarians. They've got they have the barbiturates, and they're used to euthanasia. So they go to the office, they plug, they hook themselves up, and when the staff, comes in the next morning, they find them. So it's a multifaceted problem.
And a lot of it's really changed. Like I'm still waiting for that sex talk from my parents. They say you shouldn't teach sex education in school because your dad will give you that talk, and my dad and mom still have not given me that talk. And I have 4 children and 5 grandchildren. But when I was in dental school, when I got to dental school, no one ever talked about opioid abuse. And when I got out of dental school, Henry Schein, you could order 500 tabs of hydrocodone. I mean, dentists were having them mailed to them routinely, and pharmaceutical people used to always come by and leave boxes and boxes of supplies.
My God!
And so now the pendulum is all swung, where now the kids get out of school and they realize it's a huge issue. So I tell my 4 boys, times they change. If you'd asked me when I was in high school, if someday my gay brother could get married publicly and that you could smoke pot without getting going to jail, I would have said no. And now, one generation later, the attitudes have totally changed on gay marriage and marijuana. So I have seen massive progress in my life. I think the next generation will probably address depression, suicide, and the multifactorial. I mean, it's so multifactorial. I mean, so many people have depression. They gotta fight depression and substance abuse. They don't have the best diet, exercise. You always read these articles that are saying that exercise was just as effective as many other treatments. And what do you think about medication? That's not a cure-all. I mean, it seems like the pharmacology treatment of depression, it works for some and it doesn't work for others. Would you agree with that? Or
I believe. I did not take a medication until I was 60. I took some over-the-counter medication or over-the-counter supplements, which worked very well for me for a long time. Finally asked my doctor, and he put me on something. And 3 weeks later, I'm like, what was I waiting for? But bear this in mind, Howard. I believe in a holistic approach rather than just a pharmaceutical approach. I get a good night's sleep. I'm on a very specific diet. I believe it or not, at 62, I'm an aspiring bodybuilder. I've already done my first contest, so there's an exercise element. Meditate twice a day. So I think I think pharmaceuticals are a great part of a holistic plan. They call it a safe care plan. I work 12 cruises a year on Holland America, and sailing out away from cell phone service for a week is extremely healthy. I get to catch up on all the analog work that I never have time for. Here's what I'm hoping for in the dental office, Howard, because I met two people at the Jumpstart thing I did with Vanessa Emerson. There's a young woman who speaks to hygienists and staff about dealing with patients. So suppose a patient sits down in the chair and then allows us how they are depressed and having thoughts of suicide. What's a hygienist to do? Another young woman spoke on, she'd worked for a dentist who told her, leave your problems at the door. And she was in a horribly abusive relationship with her husband. I mean, to the point he was beating her. But the dentist said that you have to leave that at the door. So she talks to staff and dentists about how, look, problems don't stop when the person turns the knob to come into the practice. And then, of course, the dentists themselves need self-care because they're at the pyramid, the top of the pyramid. They're the reason everybody else below them has a job and a place to go to work and an income. So again, it's a holistic. Just treating the dentists, good idea. Hygienists, good idea. The patients, great idea. But it's a multifaceted problem.
Well, we talked about natural selection to where America became the bipolar magnet because the people most likely to pick up and leave their country. I've read that as of today, less than 1% of all the humans on Earth are living in a country right now that they weren't born in. So it's an extremely rare behavior to just pack up and move to another. I couldn't imagine. I've lectured in 50 countries. I couldn't even imagine doing that. But the other natural selection is who becomes a dentist, or you mentioned the high suicide rate of veterinarians. Who becomes a dentist or a veterinarian or a lawyer? Not the well-rounded kid in college who had a girlfriend and was in a frat and was in a softball league. It was someone sitting in the library banging out straight A's. It's a crazy natural selection. And so when you were telling that story of this dentist not wanting to talk about this, when I meet dentists, they remind me of a mathematician, a physicist, a scientist. They just don't seem to really excel on the touchy feeling. They don't like to sell dentistry. They don't like to listen to staff, patients, people. What advice do you give to this introvert mathematician physicist who just wants to go in there and perform surgery on a molar and really doesn't want to talk to them, doesn't want to hear the patient's drama from home and says, leave that at the door? How do you coach this natural selection dentist, veterinarian, lawyer to be more holistic?
Well, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Howard, you saw somebody in your neighborhood who was a dentist who was doing very well, always had a new car every 2 years, and you thought to yourself, I want that. And it's not every kid who sees that. They may see it, they may want it, but I saw my orthodontist. I thought, man, I counted the patients that came in his office when I was there, and I multiplied by how much I was paying every month. I'm like, man, I'm going to be an orthodontist. But I just didn't have the drive, which you obviously have. I think when I read your book, it seems to me you hire people that fill in the gaps in your personality and you hire people that complement you. You have things you do very well and you want to do those things. Why not hire somebody who can do the touchy-feely, somebody who can handle the books, somebody who can deal with coding, because if you don't code correctly, you go to jail for insurance fraud. So I think the answer's in your book. You hire to fill in the gaps in your knowledge, ability, personality. I think your assistant, you said you guys make this nice, this sort of team where you fit together like two puzzle pieces, and because you can't do what she does and she can't do what you do, at least naturally. Am I right?
Yeah, I was lucky at my first dental assistant, that was a 30-year deal, but my management team is pretty much all 20 years. For 10 years, I tried to do everything myself. And then I got to realizing that that's not a very good exit strategy because everyone dies and you don't want to die and have your business, hit by a bulldozer. And so why are you doing everything yourself? You have to delegate 100% someday. Dentists don't like to delegate. They're controlling. They want to do everything. They always say, well, if you want it done right, you got to do it yourself. Well, not with that attitude. I mean, it just doesn't work. So my assistant was, 30 years out of the gate, but my whole management team, I got about 5 people who have been with me 20 years. So it shows you that I I spent 10 years not growing as optimum as I could. And I try to get dentists to learn that you just manage people, time, and money, get the best team, fire fast, hire slow. The minute you know your quarterback will never play in the playoffs or the Super Bowl, you got to fire fast. But you just surround yourself. And one other thing about dentist stress is that don't give people money that you don't want to be around. I mean, so many dentists are stressed out of their mind because they physically hate one of their employees, but they pay them money on the first 15. Never pay someone money that you don't like to be with. And there's 9 specialties to refer to. I would say that the majority drive of all my referrals in 31 years of dentistry is not because I couldn't pull the wisdom teeth, do the ortho, couldn't place the implant. It was because I didn't like that person. I thought, man, I wouldn't want someone performing. If I needed to have a bypass and someone said, yeah, this doctor's really, really good and he hates you. He really thinks you're despicable. I don't want that guy doing a bypass. I don't want to do a root canal on someone that is disrespectful. I don't like them. They're rude to the staff. And I've called the police on a patient about every decade, and I've fired a lot of patients. And anyone who says that your customer is number one is an abusive person. Your team is number one. And if I really love my Valerie and someone comes in off the street and starts dropping F-bombs and telling her everything she did wrong, and I say, we're not serving you. Get out of here. And if you don't leave right now, I'm calling 911. Your staff comes first. And what I like most about my team is when I'm driving to work, I mean, every single person that I pay money to on payroll on the 1st and 15th, I mean, over 50, I generally can't wait to see them. I like them. Well, it's like, hey, Yoni, how's your baby? Are you upset that you had a second one? Did you get any sleep? I mean, and dentists just go to work and they hide in their office because they hate their hygienist. I mean, it's crazy.
Well, and something else you said in your book, Howard, and I believe this in life in general, try to hire people who have a passion for what it is you are hiring them for. Now, you could read a book on dental suicide prevention. You could come in and you could give to the Arizona whatever, the association meeting, you could deliver it. But why not hire somebody who has a passion for it, who, when people in the audience, they can feel, the pain, the vulnerability, this guy knows what he's talking about. Same with employees in a dental practice, somebody who loves being a hygienist, somebody who loves, working the front desk, being the front door, being the face of the practice, picks up the phone. I talked to a woman this morning. I thought about you. It's the drug company. One of my injectables, have a heart thing, the sure click didn't sure click. And I called up. She goes, you're going to have to call the manufacturer. I go, let me get this straight. You provided me with the sure click. Now it's my responsibility to call the manufacturer. If the door lock doesn't work on my new car and I take it back to the dealer, they don't go, hey man, you're gonna have to call Ford. So and I asked to speak to her supervisor because not only was she curt and doesn't make any sense, she wasn't polite, and she is the face of that pharmaceutical company. So she needs a passion for dealing with people she needs some empathy, Howard, is what she needs. Oh, Mr. King, I'm so sorry that happened. Let's see if we can figure out how to. I tell you what, you're supposed to call the manufacturer, but let me do this. Let me dial them up while I've got you on the phone, and I'll walk you through it, is what she should have said. So I think if you hire the people with passion for whatever duties, job, and I'm guessing your 50 people all have passion for what it is they do, and I'm guessing if you didn't show up one day, they would still do it. That's the sign of a good organization. If all of a sudden you had to be gone for a week and it continues to run, then you have staffed well.
Well, I hope people have you come in and talk. I'm in contact with a lot of dentists. I have a lot of dentists in say Texas and small town study clubs. They say, well, The reason I like Dentaltown so much is it's anonymous. I won't go to any of my local study clubs because I'm afraid they'll find out I'm a woman dentist married to a woman, or a man dentist married to a man, or there's just a lot of fear, and people just don't want to talk about mental health, depression, bipolar, substance abuse. I mean, in this country, you want to break your leg, you don't want to have a broken brain. They're scared, and you know what made my brother? He grew up gay in Kansas, and every time he would be sad to me, I'd say, well, Paul, I said, you're not going to change the minds of 3 million people in Kansas. If your brother was gay, he'd have been on the first train to San Francisco. And my brother actually upped that idea. He moved to Sydney, Australia, because they have the highest homosexual population rate, because when they invented the airplane, people decided, well, I can't tell my Greek father I'm gay, or Italian or French or whatever. So they'd buy a one-way plane ticket to Australia. And another one that's bizarre, I can't figure it out. The biggest gay city in the United States now? You know what it is now?
No.
It's Salt Lake City.
What?
I know. It's like, how my brother can't even believe it. He goes, how did the state of Mormons now become, you get outside of Salt Lake City, it's mostly LDS, but you get in downtown and Salt Lake City, it's only half Mormon, and gay population is going high. But the point I'm making about the gay deal is that nobody could talk about their feelings that they were gay 25 years ago. Nobody could admit they preferred pot instead of Jack Daniels. And I'm hoping someday people just see the brain as like a tooth. Some teeth need a root canal, they need medication, and I do think the brain is the final frontier. I mean, it's pretty easy. People think that a cardiovascular surgeon is all that, but I mean, he's basically a glorified plumber. He takes a clogged pipe out of your heart and takes a least clogged vein out of your leg and does a coronary artery bypass graft. I think it could easily be another 1,000 years before they totally understand how the human brain works, what is intelligence, what is depression, But the best thing about it is to start the conversation. That's what I applaud you for. That's why I asked you to be on my show. You didn't call me. Is when I saw your TED Talk and I saw you speak at the Seattle Study Club, I thought this needs to get a message out. And if it's not the dentist himself, it might be his kid, it might be his spouse, it might be his family, patient, loved one. It's all over the community.
Howard, something I learned at Dentaltown is that there's a big push in dentistry for dentists to become non-physician primary care providers, and also a whole body approach. And so I said to somebody there, dentists have to go a little higher. They can't just stop just below the tonsils. They've got to go up into the, there's another organ up there above the tonsils that they really need to take to help with. If you're going to be a non-physician primary care provider, you need to take the whole body into account.
Yeah, and that's the same thing as selling dentistry. I mean, when I look at people, when you said another thing about depression is they're not taking care of themselves. A lot of the people that have 12 cavities and gum disease, and a lot of patients are like, they're a deadbeat. Well, you ever thought that maybe the reason they have 12 cavities and gum disease is because they're depressed and they're not taking care of themselves? It was a big thing I learned on cosmetic dentistry, is that when people don't like their smile, they're not into teeth, they don't brush, floss, they don't take care of it. But something as simple as just bleaching their teeth and giving them Invisalign. If they just started to like their teeth, they start taking care of it, they'd spend money on it, they get into it, and dentists, the oral health continuum, we have to be physician of the mouth. We need to quit doing the healthcare system where the physician doesn't ask you any of those questions, because in America, Medicaid, that's the lowest paying deal, Medicaid. They'll pay you $100,000 for a bypass, or $70,000 for an artificial hip, or $50,000 for an artificial knee, or a mastectomy. But then the same company will only give you $27 for the exam.
Whoa!
It's like, so okay, let me get this right. I get $100,000 if I carve Frank open, but only $27 if I talk to him for half an hour. So we have to start allocating more money to exams and consultations, and less money for just cutting people open and flaying them in a surgery.
Well, and Howard, the mouth is the gateway to the heart. I've had 2 aortic valve replacements, a double bypass, a heart attack, 3 stents, and I have to pre-medicate because if they draw blood in my mouth, there is some debate about this, but I want to have the antibiotics on board because nobody likes endocarditis. So the mouth should be taken much more seriously. It's the gateway to the entire body, whether it's diabetes or heart disease or that's something else I learned to jumpstart was how many things you can draw a straight line back to the mouth and poor dental care.
Well, his website is the Mental Health Comedian. And Frank King, you can follow him on Twitter at the MH Comedian for the Mental Health Comedian. And his TED Talk, it's called A Matter of Laugh or Death. In fact, on your TED Talk, there's a classic example. You go to YouTube. You can take that and drop it into a post on Dental Town because on the YouTube there's a share button and it'll show the link if you're texting it or tweeting it out. But that share also shows the embed. And on Dental Town there's a YouTube icon. You click that YouTube icon, drop the embed deal, and then it'll be on Dental Town. And I mean, you don't need more views. You already got 20,000, but I sure wish more dentists would hear your TED Talk. And it was just an honor and a privilege that you would come on my show today and talk to my homies on their commute to work. Frank, seriously, thanks for all that you do for dentistry, for mental health, for depression and suicide.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Howard.